So it's a weird thing. You spend a lot of time watching YouTube, reading the news, trying to keep up with current events and keeping track of the awful way that reality is unfurling and rotting and infested with maggots as we watch our civilization burn and decline, to the laughter of idiots bumbling their way through their 9 to 5 jobs or 12-hour stretch shifts trying to make ends meet, completely unaware of what's happening as they're being herded lemming-like off a cliff by human farmers. But that's a whole other thing. You watch this for time and you get frustrated and you want to talk about things and, I don't know, speak truth to power, fight the good fight, Three Dog style, whatever. And then you actually get a microphone and a BitChute channel and you think, okay, what am I going to talk about? And then you get, writer's block, obviously. And you think, what am I going to talk about? And what to start with? There's so many different things. And I thought, well, fuck it. Let's just look at what's in the news. Let's look at what's trending, and just do the basic bitch YouTuber thing of looking at what's in the news and applying some commentary. And lo and behold, the gods gift me a rather high hit rate BBC interview between Andrew Neil and Ben Shapiro. So let's take a look at that.
Ben Shapiro, you're followed by millions of people online and on social media. You're one of the biggest names in American conservatism. What is it you think you're tapping into?
He's someone who uses logic and fairly well-constructed arguments to refute demented leftist positions. And people recognise that and go, yeah, let's hear more of that.
Well, I think that there are a couple of things. One, there is actually a hunger for different ideas. The monolithic nature of the United States media is pretty evident in terms of its politics. People tend to agree on essentially the liberal point of view and increasingly a radical leftist point of view in the media. And obviously, I speak in response to that. At the same time, I try to provide an honest take on the issues of the day, and that means that I am not beholden to the Republican Party, for example. It means that I am going to speak out whenever I think that a principle is being violated, just no matter who is doing the violation.
Unless you're one of those damn Palestinians.
You work for the right-wing Breitbart website.
Andrew Neil's quite reserved at this point, but he's going to get increasingly more smug and truculent as we go forward, with his enormous jowly face, red and sweaty, with his spray-on toupee and immense entitlement and money behind him. The whole thing of right v left, which is going to dog this conversation, is muddled now because, of course, everything's getting flipped, language is getting changed. Being left-wing now means that we censor language. Being right-wing is kind of like a popular democratic revolt against an international financial elite, as opposed to just sort of being, cricket-playing conservative club members who from days past. It's all changed. So Shapiro going on about the left and Breitbart being a right-wing thing. Okay, so Breitbart's owned and run by Japanese interests, a particular ethnic tribal group, the Japanese, control Breitbart News. I don't understand how they're associated with the far right. Why is that? Why are we using that language?
But you left over its support for Donald Trump. And I think you've said you'd never vote for Mr. Trump. Why is that?
Well, in 2015, 2016, the Breitbart made a hard turn in favor of one particular candidate, and that's their prerogative. Lots of publications have an editorial point of view, and Breitbart was one of those. The reason that I left Breitbart specifically was because of an incident in which a Breitbart reporter, a female reporter, was grabbed on the arm by Corey Lewandowski, then the campaign manager for President Trump, and was bruised on the arm. And then Corey Lewandowski proceeded to lie about it, and Breitbart proceeded to throw its own reporter under the bus, suggest that she was lying or making this up. And at that point, I determined that I could no longer work for a publication that wasn't even willing to stand up for its own reporters, and instead would throw those reporters under the bus in favor of a candidate that it sought to back.
Seems like a strange thing to quit your job over, but if you've got the money, then fair enough, I guess.
Haven't you lost your battle for the Republican Party, though? Isn't the Republican Party now the party of Trump?
No, I mean, I think that the Republican Party is always the party of whomever is the president, technically speaking. But in terms of who are the sort of the thought leaders inside the conservative movement, who are the people who are driving a lot of the discussion inside the conservative movement, I don't think that's correct at all. I think that most Republicans see President Trump as a vehicle for their policy preferences, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they agree with all of his personal foibles or the way that he behaves or the things that he says. And I think a lot of Republicans respond in anger to the media attacking President Trump mainly out of a reactionary and half-appropriate upset that the media seem to have a double standard when it comes to covering certain politicians.
Yeah, so there's a lot with this. I mean, Trump's a sock puppet. He's apparently, this is a world in which there is no deep state. There's no sort of long-term globalist political agenda to destroy nations, including the US. The idea that the Republican Party has some sort of agenda as opposed to just taking orders and, you know, taking lots of money from the trough of public taxation, just like the Democrats, is bizarre to me. I don't understand that. Both sides of the house are just as corrupt as each other. Just like in the United Kingdom, it's about tax revenue. It's about taking money and living the high life with great food, great housing, and hookers and blow. And not really having to work for it. That's the con of it. So yeah, the Republicans are in no way some sort of morally pure agency. Fair point about the media, that the media are obviously completely controlled in the US by their intelligence agencies, CIA, Operation Mockingbird. What you're looking at with Trump being attacked is you're looking at one part of the deep state attacking another part of the deep state. And in case anyone's wondering what that is, I'm talking about deep state as in the deep-seated military industrial intelligence machine that operates behind the facade of democracy that exists. You know, there's a deep state in the US, there's a deep state in the UK. The sham of democracy, which I need to do a video on to sort of clarify my position on this. The sham of democracy pretends there's two separate houses and two main parties, and that's why your vote counts, because there's some kind of difference. The media just acts as like a way to push low IQ, low information voters in a particular direction, to social engineering. That's all it is. And it's weird that he doesn't seem to know this, or seems to be ignorant of this. I don't understand how he's not aware of this. He seems like an intelligent guy, Shapiro. I don't understand why he's on a program like this, because he's now talking to the deeply biased BBC, which is an awful organization funded by taxpayers, required. You've got to pay for it, so you can get their slanted social engineering indoctrination pushed into your ears and eyes. That's the point of the BBC, and Andrew Neil is just an agent of that. So I don't understand, why even get into these conversations with these people. You're not going to get anywhere.
I'm interested that you think there's a thought movement inside the Republican Party. I mean, haven't the Conservatives run out of ideas in America? All the new policies, the Medicare for all, $15 minimum wage, the Green New Deal, they're all coming from the left.
So this is this weird model of interview where what you do as the host is you bring on a guest and then you basically just take the piss out of them and insult them, or something they care about, and then you try and get a reaction out of them so then you can go, oh, gotcha. And that's apparently journalism. I don't really think it is. I think it's just bear baiting. Again, the very fact this is like his opening kind of queries with Shapiro is just, it just shows that this isn't really about trying to understand something that Shapiro's thinking, and it's not what Andrew Neil's defense would be, which is that, I'm just playing devil's advocate here. I'm just asking you the difficult questions. It's like, no, you don't care. You're just trying to get Shapiro to lose his temper. And by the way, this video isn't some sort of endorsement of Shapiro or defense of him or anything. It's literally just looking at the dynamics of what's going on here.
And they're popular.
Well, frankly, I'm confused by the idea that any of those are particularly new ideas. I mean, most of those ideas have been around since Franklin Delano Roosevelt at the very earliest, or at the very latest, rather. Some of them go all the way back to Woodrow Wilson. But the idea that new ideas are absent in the Republican Party is obviously untrue. We have a very strong debate that goes on inside sort of the conservative halls of intelligentsia about what is the appropriate action to take with regard to the medical system. Should global warming be considered a real threat, or should global warming be considered something that technology will solve? And if so, what are the best aspects of solving that? Now, there's a rich intellectual debate on the right about nationalism versus patriotism, for example, or populism versus free marketeerism. That debate is happening on the right to sort of suggest that the right in America is bereft of ideas, but the left is full of ideas. Number one, not all ideas are good ideas. I mean, AOC is pretty good evidence of that. I'm a big fan of some old ideas myself that I think are pretty good. But beyond that, I think that it is intellectual sneering of the highest order to suggest that only the left has new and decent ideas.
A good response, and you can tell it's a good response, or at least Andrew Neil thinks it's a good response, because he completely ignores it and just moves on to his next question. If Shapiro had answered this one badly, he would have pressed him further on it, but because he moves on, you can tell that he answered well.
Some of the ideas that are popular in your side of politics would seem to take us back to the Dark Ages. Georgia, new abortion laws, which you are much in favour of, that a woman who miscarries could get 30 years. A Georgian woman who travels to another state for an abortion procedure could get 10 years. These are extreme hard policies.
So O'Neill brings out his trump card, which is the abortion stance. He knows this is going to play very well to his audience. Female audience viewers will almost universally be supportive of, as you would expect from their biological position, also from their indoctrination, to be pro-choice. Anything that smacks of rights being restricted on this is going to play very badly to the audience and make Shapiro look like the bad guy. O'Neill is, of course, trying to find the most extreme examples he can think of. He's going for outliers, which is, again, what the left do. Again, another idea for a video would be just to have like a list of tricks in debate that the left play into, such as, let me find a very extreme case that I can use to wedge and crack open your position. So the basic premise that perhaps we shouldn't kill unborn children, which if the Democrats have their way, like in New York, includes pretty much up to the moment of birth. You can just crush its head, because it would have interfered with their skiing holiday in Colorado. No, really, look up the stats. I can't deal with this right now. I have to go on holiday, so I need an abortion. Versus, the obvious common sense middle ground, and nobody will like this, and everyone will say "fuck you" for me saying this. So I'm just going to say it anyway to piss everybody off. With the obvious sensible common ground, which is generally don't have an abortion, use contraception, enjoy sex, have relationships, get pregnant. We need more babies for Caucasians, definitely. But if your baby's going to be incredibly sickly, mentally handicapped, severely physically handicapped, if giving birth to the child is going to kill the mother, if the baby was born of rape or incest, which is non-consensual sex, then okay, I'm like, yeah, I can get on board with that. I can get on board with killing the child in that situation. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. That's what abortion is. I think sometimes there's a place for that, just as I sometimes think there's a place for capital punishment. A lot of people disagree with that. But in the US, it's this insane polarity of all abortion, stop it now, no abortions ever, or the let's just kill babies and chop them up. And I think both sides are extreme and lack nuance. The vast majority of abortions, I have to say though, the vast majority of abortions from statistics released in the US show that they're for pretty minor reasons, not what I would consider a valid reason for having an abortion. But hey, I can't really talk about this because it's a huge thing. It's a whole topic. I'm getting off track.
Well, okay, a couple of things. One, I'm not sure. I mean, frankly, I don't know whether are you an objective journalist or are you an opinion journalist?
Andrew Neil is actually effectively a state intelligence asset that promotes social engineering agendas to control the population. That's the point of it.
I'm a journalist that asks questions.
Okay, so you're a supposedly objective journalist calling policies with which you disagree barbaric and suggesting only one side of the political aisle has ideas. So I just want to point out that I wish you would at least be honest in your own biases.
Mr. Shapiro, I know that broadcasting in America is now so polarized that on one program you only have the left and another one you just have the right. My job is to question those who have strong views and put an alternative to them. If you were an anti-abortion person, I would be putting pro-abortion questions to you. But you are
really would you call the pro-choice position?
So why don't you just answer my question,
sir? I'm happy to answer your question. Please answer this one. Would you suggest that a late-term abortion is brutal?
I'm not taking a view on this issue. I'm asking you the questions.
Yeah, he's full of shit. And Shapiro's calling him out, and he doesn't like it.
Sir, you just suggested that the pro-life position is inherently brutal and terrible, so I'm asking you, as an objective journalist, would you ask the same question to a pro-choice advocate by calling their position brutal and horrible?
What I'm asking you is that why is it that...
The problem here is that Shapiro's trying to turn this into a debate because he knows in a debate he could undercut Neil and win. So Neil just ignores him and goes, no, this is just an interview, air quotes, where I fire bombards at you and you get hit in the nuts, basically. It's like one of those, if you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball things. Neil's there sat in his wheelchair throwing wrenches at Shapiro's crotch, and Shapiro just has to kind of take it. And as long as he does that, then he's being a good boy. And that's playing the game. Now Shapiro's trying to say, hey, look, let me ask you a question. I just want to say one thing. He's being very American about it. And it's poor form. It's poor form. So Neil can just steamroll him at this point. So Shapiro's trying a move to change the nature of the conversation. But he's very naive to think this would work.
That a bill banning abortions after a woman has been pregnant for 6 weeks is not a return to the Dark Ages. What's your answer?
My answer is something called science. Human life exists at conception. It ought to be protected. Now, back to my question to you. You purport to be an objective journalist. BBC purports to be an objective down-the-middle network. It obviously is not. It never has been. And you as a journalist are proceeding to call one side of the political aisle ignorant, barbaric, and sending us back to the Dark Ages. Why don't you just say that you're on the left? Is this so hard for you? Why can't you just be honest?
There's a lot of emphasis on this point in the conversation as being when Shapiro severely missteps and accuses Neil of being on the left. Neil gets away with this one because he's a right-wing voice, at least in the eyes of the NPCs and the normies. The sheep basically see him as being right wing. He's not actually right wing. He's an agent of the state. He's part of the control, the globalist control. Again, the whole left right thing gets very confusing at this point because you're looking at a Zionist Jewish Republican talking to a guy who was the editor for things like The Spectator and the Daily Mail, and who now works for the BBC, pushing propaganda. So he's just a propagandist in different, state-controlled vehicles, doing the same job. And they're basically trying to undercut and undermine each other. Andrew Neil's position is saying, well, look, you support barbaric treatment of women, so you don't get to talk. And Shapiro's saying, no, you're on the left. You can't talk to me because this should have been a neutral interview, and I want this to be a debate, but it isn't. It's an interview, and I'm not doing very well at this point.
Mr.
Seriously,
Shapiro,
it's a serious question.
Mr. Shapiro, if you only knew how ridiculous that statement is, you wouldn't have said it.
He's such a smug prick. But as unlikable as Neil is, he's got a point. Shapiro now looks foolish, and he's obviously not researched the person he's speaking to.
So let's move on. Would you vote for Mr. Trump? I
think it's pretty evident from your own questions exactly what you are, sir.
Would you vote for Mr. Trump in 2020?
I'd certainly consider voting for Mr. Trump in 2020, just like I'd consider voting for anybody else in 2020.
But didn't you once say that you'd never vote for him?
So now both men are getting really petulant and childish with each other. Shapiro's answer is essentially, well, maybe, no, I don't know. And then Neil follows up with, well, you once said something at some point that might contradict that, so what's with the inconsistency? Which, as if Shapiro is... as if you're supposed to never ever change your mind or grow or develop as a person, as if circumstances don't change and you don't go, okay, well, now I'm going to do this instead. When did that become a thing, that you could never ever change your mind? And if you talk about politics and you have a different opinion from one year to the next, because, assuming you have some sort of justification for the change, of course, if there's some train of logic, why would that be a bad thing? What, you're supposed to come out of the womb with one perspective on life and of all the answers? That's nobody's like that. So it's a series of silly questions and silly answers at this point.
I said that I wouldn't vote for him in 2016. And then I wrote a column for National Review explaining the conditions under which I might change my mind.
You're a culture war warrior. Isn't he largely on your side? You wrote once it was unlikely he'd appoint conservative judges to the Supreme Court. He has.
Right.
So you were wrong.
And so I like many of President Trump's policies, even if I still have serious reservations about his personality and character.
So 2 points here. One is that Andrew Neil's he's just trying to discredit Shapiro in any way he can. This isn't an interview in good faith. This is just him trying to demolish somebody and make them look silly. It's bear baiting. It's not really professional journalism as most people would think of it. And the second point is that, again, you can see that because Shapiro answered quite well in both questions, Neil just moves on. Because there's nothing he can really dig into and get his hooks into.
Do you think there's a Democrat that could beat him in 2020?
Sure, I think there are several Democrats who could beat him in 2020.
Who would have the best chance?
I think that Joe Biden is likeliest to beat him, considering that he has significant appeal in a lot of the Rust Belt, in places like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, the places that President Trump needs to win to retain the presidency. And Joe Biden also has a long history in politics, which means that the American people already have sort of a preconceived vision of him. President Trump, as a campaigner, is very good at dragging unknowns through the mud or at exposing details about people that are previously sort of covered up. But when it comes to Joe Biden, he's been well exposed for a very long time. Most people know him, and he's not nearly as unpopular even going in as Hillary Clinton was in 2016.
Bit of a weird choice, considering that Joe Biden allegedly is a predatory paedophile who has a taste for young girls, say some awful, evil people who I certainly don't agree with.
So if it was a close race between Mr. Biden and Mr. Trump, you would, from what you say, I think, probably go for Mr. Trump.
Yes, I would vote for Mr. Trump if it were a race between Biden and Trump, because I think that the damage that President Trump has done to the country on a character and rhetorical level has already been done and cannot be undone. I don't see it as getting worse day by day. That is the new status quo, unfortunately. Now the question becomes which policies I would most like to see enacted, and Trump's policy preferences are closer to my own than Joe Biden's are.
Now, you're a star of new media, of conservative new media. You and others on the left and the right, you position yourselves as supposed tellers of hard truths. But haven't you all just really coarsened public discourse in America and exacerbated its divisions?
I'd ask this guy to elaborate on what exactly he means by that, because that's an incredibly vague diss on a lot of people doing lots of different things on different new media platforms. Is he talking about YouTube commentators? Is he talking about people hosting podcasts? What does he mean? Is he talking about Antifa? Like, what do you mean? You're coarsening debate. In what way? So, and this coming from the fat snobby little Scotsman rat in a suit who gets paid, God knows how much money, tens of thousands of pounds to sling mud at anybody who vaguely challenges the status quo. Sure, this guy can stand in judgment and look down on people.
It's kind of odd to be hearing about me coarsening public discourse when you call policies you disagree with brutal and bringing us back to the Dark Ages, sir.
The point, I don't want to return to it, but the point was to put a position for you to reply to it. And I thought we'd covered that.
I
put
think
some of the points too, because on your
videos, characterization of issues is part of the problem in the coarsening of public debate.
Well, maybe it's also part of your problem too, because
Andrew Neil can't even look at Shapiro as he says this. He just sort of hunches over in his chair and looks at his papers and tries to look authoritarian and intimidating, and generally fails in this. All he can do is ignore anything that challenges his position. He just ignores and moves on, and then now Neil's getting a little bit defensive because he's starting to throw in little barbs like, well, maybe it's part of your problem, and getting a little bit sort of catty with Shapiro, and so that's starting to seep out the venom behind the mask of impartiality that's barely held in place with bits of sticky tape.
As we have from your YouTube videos, Ben Shapiro destroys the abortion argument. Ben Shapiro destroys transgenderism and abortion. Is that not a kind of coarse public discourse?
Well, are those videos labeled by me?
I have no idea. But
why are you picking out? Why are you? I have a question. Why are you picking out random YouTube videos put up by people who are not me?
Are you
and then attributing the titles to me?
Are you unhappy with the way they've been described?
I think that people can describe me however they please. It's a free country, and I'm all in favor of a public debate. If you watch the actual clips, they are generally civil conversations between me and somebody who disagrees with me.
Bunch of really stupid questions, snaky questions from the weasel in the suit. Shapiro just answers in a very straightforward manner, easily deflects them.
You say in your new book, you suggest that America's largest struggle at the moment is, quote, the struggle for our national soul. We are so angry at each other right now. And I think that's true. I've just returned from the United States. But aren't you part of the problem with the way you go about your discourse, not the solution?
Again, incredibly disingenuous questions coming from Andrew Neil, state propaganda actor and disinformation intelligence agent.
And I think we can all do better in our discourse, but the fact that I've reached out to so many people across the aisle to have conversations with them is pretty evident. The fact that I was willing to walk from a publication that was paying me money over principle is pretty evident. The fact that I've called out President Trump, a member of a party of which I am a member, repeatedly when I think that he has done things that are immoral, I think is decent evidence that I'm looking at least for a civil conversation.
Well, as you say in your book, you say that there's quite a key phrase, we are so angry at each other right now. But as I say, aren't you part of that anger? Aren't you encouraging that anger? For example, you described Mr. Obama's State of the Union address in 2012 as fascist mentality in action.
I guess the left has never described anything that they disagree with as fascist in a moment of overblown hyperbole. No, that never happens. It's never that somebody on the right is a Nazi or fascist. So, oh my God, Shapiro said that something Obama did. No real context, no real explanation of this. What part in the State of the Union address was this referring to? Can we get more info on that? No, just you once called Obama a fascist, so that's outrageous. Where'd you get off doing that? It's just, oh my God, it's so disingenuous.
Well, I think that if you want to argue with the characterization, then we can talk about what exactly his State of the Union address said. Is it charged language in politics? Sure. The problem that I have is not with charged language in politics, which I'm generally in favor of. I like a robust public debate and a very loud and spirited public debate. I have no problem with that whatsoever. What I'm talking about is the assumption that people with whom we disagree politically are inherently of bad character or, in your words, want to bring us back to the dark ages.
Which is a huge part of the problem with the modern left, which is that if you're a leftist, you would view anyone right of you politically as being morally at fault. The left is very much like a religion. They don't adhere to science. They don't adhere to facts or logic. Their worldview doesn't really make sense or hold water. So what they do is they say, well, look, if you're not part of our little faith, our cult, then you're evil. So to be on the right is a moral failing, and this ties in with why it's acceptable to be physically violent to people who are deemed to be on the right by cult leaders. So that's why Antifa, the whole punch a Nazi thing, or destroy property or attack people, is fine because they're morally compromised. You have to understand this. You're not dealing with normal debate anymore, and this is why I have a big problem with the whole centrist, skeptic, rationalist individualist, what else they're calling themselves now, position, because they're acting like they can have a civilized debate with people on a rational basis, and the vast majority of people aren't prepared to do that for various reasons, whether it's because they don't have the IQ to have a debate. They've been brainwashed by sophistry. They are part of a particular religious group that maybe doesn't really tolerate diversity of ideas, or has any history of tolerating diversity of ideas, or the left, which is the modern day left, is just a kind of a giant cult that you can be excommunicated from if you say the wrong things. You can be denounced and exiled, and then they walk after you ringing the bell, shouting "shame, shame." So yeah, you can't have a civilized debate nowadays in the West, because you're arguing with cultists. You're arguing with, the sparrows from Game of Thrones. Anyone gets that reference? You're walking up to these people with little pentagrams carved into their foreheads, and you're expecting to have some kind of rational discussion, and it's just ludicrous, because you're not going to get anywhere. They're brainwashed. They think that they're talking to someone who is evil. It's like what's actually Dark Ages is a position where you've got a scarily big chunk of society who think that if you disagree with them, you're evil, and therefore you can be hounded and you can lose your job, you can be assaulted, you can be imprisoned, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing, because you're doing the Lord's work by punishing these heretics. That's where it's at. And if you're new to this, or you're not aware of this, you need to really wake up to that quickly, because having a civilized conversation with cultists is going to leave you nailed to a fucking tree with vultures pecking out your eyes. You need to be prepared for this.
But again, it was your description of the State of the Union address in 2012 as fascist.
The wording of President Trump's 2012 address was bad and wrong.
There are plenty of things that are bad and wrong, but it doesn't make them fascist.
Well, I suppose that's true. But if you'd like to read me the column out loud, I suppose I can critique it for you.
Oh, well, again, with Mr. Obama, you said, and you're Jewish yourself. I only mention that because, to put this in context, the Jews who vote for Obama are, by and large, Jews in name only. Ginos, you call them.
And so finally, we get to the point where Neil is going to really get into the weak underbelly of Shapiro, because now he's been attacking him in different ways. He's been trying to piss him off and shame him and all the rest of it. So now he's going after the Jewish angle. And this is actually going to be the most effective thing that Neil does, because now this is the turning point in the argument. It's not an interview. It's two people yelling at each other, where he's really going to start getting under Shapiro's skin because of the religion angle. That's where Shapiro can't be as rational as he'd like to be.
My statement was based on the fact that Jews in the United States, as an ethnic group, are largely irreligious, which is true by every single poll. Jews are the most irreligious group in the United States. As an Orthodox Jew who actually takes Judaism seriously, the point that I am making is that most Jews who are ethnically Jewish are not religiously Jewish in any context.
No. The point you were making is that Jews who vote for Obama are Jews in name only.
I said that, yes, that is correct, that Jews who voted for Barack Obama, a progenitor of the Iran deal, a person who was cracking down on religious liberty, a person who spent much of his career as president of the United States attempting to deprive Israel of the necessities to defend itself, Jews who voted for President Obama, by and large, cared about Judaism far less than they did about other priorities.
Did you say they should turn their badge in as a Jew?
Yeah, you've been a bad Jew. You've got to report to the synagogue, and there's this rabbi behind a desk smoking a cigar with a telephone ringing like a 70s cop show. And he's like, "All right, you got to turn in your badge, your gun, your ID tattoo." You can't be a Jew. You can't be a Jew anymore. You got to toss your yarmulke over here like a frisbee, here's your foreskin back and all this. You're not a real Jew anymore. And it's because as we all know, under Obama's watch, Israel got absolutely no funding. It's spot on there from Shapiro that Obama got into office and Israel was just hung out to dry. They had no money coming in for those years. It was they were cut loose. Just complete distortion of reality on all sides at this point.
Yes, I believe that if you are somebody who takes Judaism seriously, that comes along with ideological commitment.
I mean, I guess.
Also, I hope you're having fun, by the way, going through every old tweet that I've ever sent to try and do gotcha questions. But if you'd like to have a discussion about my general philosophy or things I've done in, say, I don't know, that's 2012, so it's now 2019. If you'd like to discuss something I've done in, say, like the past 5 years, why don't we do that? How about that?
Because your book is a criticism of how angry America is and how America has to do better. And I'm simply trying to...
Okay, so I actually missed this point that Andrew Neil makes the first time I saw this interview. This is quite crucial. It shows you the spark of the idea of how they were going to do this whole thing, this whole hit piece attack on Shapiro here. They see this young conservative writing a book. They don't like his message. They don't like what he stands for because they're a bunch of filthy communist, despicable people. The BBC. So they're like, all right, we've got to take this guy down. So they're sat in a conference room, and Andrew Neil's there, being filleted by an attractive young Scottish woman that he gets to write off as expenses from his BBC salary, and she's working away down there, and he's smoking a cigar, and he's like, what we should do? Look, the title of his book, what is it? It's something about people being angry. So it's a critique of the anger in America. Oh, I know what we should do. Let's just piss him off. Let's just get Shapiro on the show, and I'll sling mud in his eye until he gets annoyed, and then when he gets annoyed, then we can go, well, gotcha, and this will be lapped up, and people will go, yeah, Shapiro got wrecked. That's and the interns and whatnot sat around there are like, well, seems like a pretty good plan, boss. Let's do this. So actually, this is where it came from. This is why the interview is structured this way. This is why Neil's doing what he's doing. They're trying to piss Shapiro off. That's why all the questions are geared this way. And so the way that Shapiro would have won this is if he kept his cool throughout, because the whole point was to try and say you're a hypocrite because you got angry. And unfortunately, Shapiro ends up getting angry, which I can completely understand because it's such a bad faith interview. But you can. This is the crucial thing of why he lost technically.
List on my website, sir. On my list, I have an entire website of dumb, bad things that I've said. I'm simply trying to point
out some of the things you've said that seem to me to help to stoke that anger. For example, you said Israelis like to build. Arabs like to bomb crap and live in open sewage.
I'm sure there's. I'm sure that's completely untrue.
Well, as I say in an article entitled, "Here's a list of all the giant, bad, dumb things I've ever said."
Was that dumb?
Well, yes, that's a dumb tweet. And not only, but it is also important to mention that the next few tweets clarify that tweet is specifically referring to the Hamas leadership, which, by the way, a BBC I've seen is relatively reticent to condemn.
No, actually, it wasn't. What you went on to do and say, you are correct about the slur on Arabs. It's not all Arabs that want to live in open sewage and blow things up. It's just Palestinians.
Oh, Ben, your Zionism is showing again.
On to say,
it says the ones who take sides against Israel in the Israel-Palestinian conflict.
Population is rotten to the core, you went on to say. Not Hamas, the Palestinian Arab population.
I say that by poll numbers, they elected Hamas. They educate their children in school that Israel should be obliterated, sir.
And with this, Shapiro finally loses his cool.
I guess
if you want to read, honestly, this is a giant waste of time in the sense that the entire interview is designed for you to shout slogans or old things that I've said at me. I don't see how this forwards the debate. You talk about undermining the public discourse. It seems to me that simply going through and finding lone things that sound bad out of context and then hitting people with them is a way for you to make a quick buck on BBC off the fact that I'm popular and no one has ever heard of you.
The catty little dig at the end there kind of undermines it, but the vast majority of that exchange that Shapiro gives there is completely true and on point.
There are not many bucks to be made on the BBC, unlike American broadcasting, Mr. Shapiro.
Get the fuck out of town, Neil.
I get the point I'm trying to make is that your words are hardly designed to produce the consensus and understanding that the book seems to want to produce. That's my point, that you write about, Judeo-Christian culture and so on, but so much of what you've said in the past would seem to...
The body language here appears to be Shapiro's tell that he's physically holding his jaw shut. He's applying pressure to his cheek to hold his mouth in check because he wants to bite this guy's head off.
Turn its back on Judeo-Christian culture.
You're lecturing me on Judeo-Christian culture after you call the pro-life position barbaric?
I just asked you a question.
And I asked you a question. You failed to answer a single one of mine. Frankly, I find this whole thing a waste of time. If you want to read the book and critique the book, why don't you read and critique the book? If you want to critique me, you can think whatever you want of me.
Why don't you
frankly,
just try and
I don't
answer
care.
the
I don't frankly give a damn what you think of me since I've never heard of you.
And I've never heard of you until I briefed myself for this. But that's not the issue. You have a new book out.
Then why the hell are you interviewing me, sir?
It's an interesting book. But my point is, your book claims that society...
Well, it'd be nice if you would quote it from time to time.
Your book is... Well, actually, I've done so several times, and I'm about to do so again.
So now the whole thing's just collapsing. They're just firing shots at each other. There's no respect. Andrew Neil's position is just this awful, smug, superior, sneering at him, which is awful. Shapiro is unfortunately lapsing into it's fairly unseemly, his ego of, well, I've never even heard of you because I'm this big celebrity, and that doesn't make him look good. But I assume he's doing that because he's thrown and he's not quite sure how to respond at this point. He's just very angry. And again, to be fair, he started off in a civilized way. Neil's brought this out in him by pissing him off. So yeah, I think most of us would eventually get angry if taunted enough times by some little fucking rat, who's I'm sure paid quite handsomely, despite his earlier claims that BBC people like him, oh, there's no bucks to be made, Mr. Shapiro. No, Neil, that's a crock of shit, and you know it, mate.
If you would let me just finish the question. Your book
frankly, I don't
claims
think
that society
honestly,
is turning its back
sir,
on Judeo-Christian values.
Yeah,
what are those values? What are the values it's turning its back on?
I'm not inclined to continue an interview with a person as badly motivated as you as an interviewer. So I think we're done here. I appreciate your time, sir.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time and for showing that anger is not part of American political discourse. Now, Mr. Shapiro, we'll say goodbye.
Just awful, just disgusting. This fucking guy. Look at his smug little pig face. Jesus Christ. I mean, oh God, I can't believe this is the world I have to live in, where people like this sneer out of the TV screen, elaborate gotcha scenarios. Who is he fooling? Does anyone watch this and think that Andrew Neil is some sort of actual intellectual? Is this meant to be for intelligent people? Is this meant to be high-minded? This is bear baiting. This is just so juvenile and just bullshit. And yeah, basically, fuck Andrew Neil, fuck the BBC, and it leaves a sour taste in the mouth, because you got somebody who's coming along, they're prepared to have a conversation, they're prepared to actually exchange ideas, and it's like, no, we're the BBC, we're just gonna crush you. We're just going to crush you because we can, and it's the smug face of a bully. And I really don't like that. I don't like bullies, and I don't like people who are in positions of unaccountable power who can just fuck with other people and then think it's fun and think it's a game. And Andrew Neil's going to go home. He's going to be paid very handsomely for all this, slaps on the back, and he's going to think he's great. He's going to think he's a good person. And no, the thing is, At the end of the day, people like Andrew Neil are absolutely part of the problem. They're absolutely part of the problem. And until people like him are no longer pumping out their propaganda to the population, until institutions like the BBC are either fundamentally altered or shut down, the problem will continue. And their idea of a problem is, resisting being assaulted. Just lie down and die. Don't you dare challenge their position, because then you're being angry. Then you're causing a problem. They're not the problem. No. They're the wise elite, and they're gonna talk down to you and sneer at you. And yeah, they're just vile, nihilistic pieces of garbage. A lot of them.